Welcome to this evening's evening review edition. My name is Jemima Beatrice, your host this evening. The divisions caused by a power tussle between Ovaherero Traditional Authority Chiefs Council Chairperson Chief Vipuira Kapuuo and Professor Mutjinde Katjiua, who was coronated as the Ovaherero paramount chief last weekend, continues unabated. Now we are speaking to Chief Kapuuo's spokesperson, Dr. Uazuva Kaumbi, to explain to us why they do not accept Katjiua's chieftainship. Thank you for joining us, Doctor.
No, thank you very much, Jemima. Thanks for having me here.
Now, the first question, Doctor, is obviously, is Chief Kapuuo and his supporters willing to sit around the table to find a solution to this chieftainship dispute?
Yes, thanks, Jemima, and to your viewers as well. Yes, we've always been open, and in fact, we've demonstrated that as well. Kapuuo, in particular, he's always been open. We've had already about 3 attempts now made, and all through those 3 attempts, then we actually indicated our willingness. The first one was with the regional governor of Mahege region, Governor Pionganate. Just before we went to the agent court case, he actually called the parties together in Khobabe. We accepted also the invitation. Unfortunately, our colleagues did not accept the invitation. They actually declined it. That was, I think, around the 1st of April already. And then the second attempt then was by there's a group of concerned pastors, clergy, Herero-speaking clergy, who then also called the different groups. They had a meeting with Professor Katjiua and his people, and then also with Kapuuo and his people, separately first. So the idea was that we were supposed to meet now for him to bring the two, shall I say, leaders together with their people and discuss. But unfortunately, that date now has been postponed, the meeting. Looking at that. The third one is the one that you reported on with the Bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church, in the Republic of Namibia, Bishop Taib, who also called us just, I think, about a week or so before the events of last weekend. And then we also reached an agreement, actually, in principle. Maybe later on we can go into detail about that. And we all were there. Chief Kapuuo was there, Professor Katjiua was there, and his people, and the family also, of the late advocate Vipuira also. So that is a clear demonstration that we are willing to talk, and in order to reach some kind of amicable settlement. Yes.
So we see this a number of events taking place, starting with the governor, starting with the clergy, and then also with Bishop Taib. And yet we saw at what happened at Okahanya this weekend was 2 separate people and a lot of antagonism. So why then this antagonism if people are actually around the table?
Yeah, I think that's always the case. You see, because the leadership, they take on a particular position and say, look, no, we are willing to talk. And then when unfortunately people report back to the masses, then obviously there's a problem. We were always ready. What happened is that Kahanja, I don't think there was so much animosity. It was more about, I think, having an event by 2 people who had not yet finally agreed, because unfortunately our colleagues pulled out of the agreement with Bishop Taib, because the idea was that the family of the late paramount chief advocate Vipuira, where they were supposed to get together and agree on how we were going to do it. Our principal agreement was that we shall all have one event. The family, because really the chiefs are not the ones who are responsible for the unveiling. The family, normally they have what they call Omuyanwa, so that's somebody who belongs to the matrilineal totem of the late paramount chief. They call it Omukuva or Mutati. We identify that person even, from the Kuhanga side, because that is the patrilineal lineage of Advocate Vipuira. And then because all that person does once they have communicated to the ancestors is then really to remove the cover on the tombstone. And then from there, the normal commemoration will then start, or veneration of our elders will start. That was the agreement that we had. Unfortunately, our colleagues did not agree with that. Unfortunately, the widow was not there at the meeting with the bishop. So they said, look, they were going to consult with the widow, and some other children were not there. But the patrilineal side and the matrilineal side also of the family was there. They had agreed with that. And that is why it really broke down. So by the time we got to Okahanja, unfortunately, this agreement could not be implemented. And that is why we had this, what appeared like 2 separate events. And also that Kapuuo had already booked this, for instance, his people, the Red Flag, the commando, and those Jason Evan as well. And when our colleagues arrived there, they wanted to actually put up tents, the plot nearby there. And the police actually told them, no, look, this was booked, and because there's no real peace deal yet, it's very difficult for them to control people who are so in close proximity. And that is why they then opted to go to this farm of Uazuva Kaumbi, which I also commend them. I think it was a good move to avoid this conflict that could have easily spilled over into something very nasty. So I think from that point of view, we really managed to manage the situation from both sides, that it doesn't become ugly. What happened on Sunday morning, unfortunately, is that they arrived early. I think they arrived as early as 4 or 5 o'clock or whatever, 6 o'clock, without our knowledge, you know, and then they did what they did. So we said, look, we're not going to interfere as well. We told the police, look, they let them do what they want to do, and then afterwards, once they are done, then we will come in, and that's what happened. You know. So we waited for them to finish. They did their part, because the unveiling is not, although we would have all wanted to be part of it, but it's not a significant event that would actually would allow to spill more blood, you know. So that is why we allowed them to do it. And once they're done, we came in, and as you saw, you know, everything went peacefully. You know, of course, it made some, especially the elders, very angry. You know, that a group of people would not come without agreement, and then they would do the things that they did. But that's really water under the bridge. We're happy that the weekend went ahead without much conflict. Could have been worse, you know. Could have been worse, like, you know, in the commando beginning of the year, somebody was shot and that person ultimately died, you know. So it could have been worse with so many people around. So we commend the Namibian police, and we commend the leadership also on both sides for managing the situation to the extent that we could have gone a lot worse. You could see the tempers, you know, flaring and so on, but we succeeded, and we are very happy about that. Let's hope that that will also be now the seed that will be planted to, as we move forward, that we can reach some kind of amicable solution moving forward.
Now, Doctor, during this weekend's Red Flag commemorations at Okahanya, the supporters of Chief Kapuuo were really, if you had to compare them to the supporters of Professor Katjiua, a handful of people, whereas Professor Katjiua attracted hordes of people.
Yes.
If one look at that, is that not an indication of what the people want?
No, look, it's... I wouldn't say so. Okay, look, I don't know what time you were there, but if you look at the people, for instance, ultimately ended up at the graveside, there were a lot more people. I know at the commando there were few people, because I think it was just a cold day, and also what happened is that they were waiting to hear what would happen. A lot of people really were trying to avoid this conflict, because I heard that Professor Katjiua and his people were at the graveside, you know, and so the idea was they wanted to get some assurance that there will be peace, you know. And that the other people will withdraw, or they will recede, or they will move away once we are there. But the time we got there, I don't know what pictures, we have a lot of pictures there, we attracted a crowd. But for us, again, also, it's really immaterial, because it's not really a popularity contest. Because those are not that is not even a sample of the Ovaherero people for us to determine who wants, you know, what. If you look at the events we had in Swakopmund, we had a large crowd, you know, and then we had the event in Okanjira, for instance, we had large crowds. This one here was different, because now the two groups were meeting for the same event at the same place, you know, and that scared off a lot of people. A lot of people were calling us, should we come, is it safe, and so on and so on, you know. But that really, to me, maybe to answer your question very briefly, is that is not an indication at all about where the loyalties of the people lie. I think that will be determined as we go along, and that is not even necessary. Yeah.
So why exactly is it that Chief Kapuuo and his supporters does not accept the chieftainship of Professor Katjiua?
Yeah, look, what happens is that, look, I think we've made these points very clear right from the beginning. I think the best thing to do is to say, look, let's go back to the 18th of June 2021, on the day that our late paramount chief, Advocate Vipuira, you know, may his soul rest in peace, left us. You know, we're saying that what normally happens when a paramount chief passes on, there are structures in place, and there's customary, you know, practice in place that says, look, the chairperson of the chief council becomes the caretaker chief or paramount chief until the chief council meeting is convened, and then people put their heads together, and then they get the process of succession underway, where candidates then are called, or the names are called for candidates who are interested in this position, and then about 3 or 4 months are given before the Senate is convened, because that is where the designation takes place. And that is the process that Kapuuo had always wanted to, you know, to be followed, because remember, he followed the same process when Paramount Chief Riwako also passed. He was the chairperson of the Chief Council. he was then the acting paramount chief. He convened the meeting in Ehungiro, and there was a contest there. We had people like Dr. Howard Rocco, for instance, who were also interested at the time. And then Advocate Bekwiriko actually emerged victorious. So there are a lot of those elements where we say, look, let's wait for the process to finish. Now, unfortunately, in this case, we had also a situation where the tombstone was also erected immediately after the burial. Normally, the old custom is that people will wait, some time before they erect the tombstone. But I think the modern practice now is that and then the tombstone is covered. Some people would normally actually cover it and then come the next day, they would unveil the tombstone, so that then that enables us to start the next phase, which is now the succession. But that did not happen. The tombstone was covered for almost a whole year. So the understanding was that let us first remove the covering, or do the unveiling, and then we can start formally. Because in terms of our culture, unless or until the tombstone is unveiled, the funeral is not yet finalized, and you cannot really start already with succession while the person is not, finally buried. So that was the thinking. So you had those things of procedure, that what happens in the interim in terms of the acting paramount, what happens until the person's tombstone is unveiled, and then the procedure from the chief counsel, who must convene the chief counsel. There are so many letters, lawyers' letters that Kapuuo wrote. So look, you cannot, he's the person as the chairperson who must convene that meeting, and then people must agree on the agenda and so forth. But unfortunately, our colleagues went ahead, they convened that chief council meeting in December in Onderombapa in Aminuis, and at that meeting, the agenda that we got did not have a succession on the agenda, so we thought that there will just be a bunch of people getting together in Onderombapa, and then Kapuuo said, look, I cannot attend because they didn't go through him. And then only when they came back did we hear that they've actually nominated, or even, in fact, at that time they had already designated Professor Katjiua without any contest, without any process of succession, having been officially declared open so that other people can also participate. And so when they came back and when we raised this issue that the chief counsel does also not designate the paramount chief, at best they open the process and then convene the Senate, because the Senate is a much wider representation. And that is when then the chieftaincy issue is resolved. And then once they had that, then they again organized another meeting in Onderombapa, where essentially they just then confirmed what they did as a chief counsel, which we believe that is not the way it should be done.
Okay.
Yeah, so as far as we're concerned, therefore, that process was not done properly. We should now, as you know from Okahanja, then Kapuuo then said, look, now that we've unveiled the tombstone, it is now that the succession process can start. And that's why he called for names as well. I think you guys carried an article, or was it you, or was it another newspaper, that now we are now looking for names of people who are interested in the position, so that now we can formally start the process. So that is why we feel that process that was followed is unprocedural. Yeah.
Okay. Doctor, we are going for a short break,
yeah, sure,
and then
no
we will
problem.
break.
No problem.
Okay. See you after that break. Welcome back. Now, if you've just joined us, we are speaking to Dr. Uazuva Kaumbi. He is the spokesperson of Vipuira, Kapuuo. Now, Doctor, before we went on a break, we were talking about why Chief Kapuuo and his supporters does not accept the chieftainship of Professor Mutjinde Katjiua. Now, one of the arguments from the other side is that these customs on which Chief Kapuuo is basing his argument, and it's not written down. These are just practices that have been practiced over years. Can you please comment on that?
Yeah, look, when a practice is repeated, it becomes custom. And that's where the word customary law comes from. It comes from the fact that a practice was initiated at a particular point in time, and then it was repeated, with minor variations, of course, because it will never be 100%. And that's why it's called custom. And then in terms of the Traditional Authorities Act, customary law is recognized. And in fact, it's actually put on the same pedestal as common law or even statutory law. And I think it was section 5 or so that deals with the designation. It actually says that the paramount or the chief, in terms of the act, there's no paramount chief. Paramount chief is just our own nomenclature. But in terms of the act, the chief is the head of the traditional community. In this case, the OTA. That person then must also be appointed in terms of the customary law. And so we are saying, look, we're looking at even just, we go back as far as 1863. That's when the position of paramount chief was actually used for the first time, especially with our wars, even against the numbers, not even against the Germans at the time. And that is why it has come more than 100 years now, almost 150 years, almost 160 years now that we've had these practices, of course with variations here and there. And that's why we are saying, yes, we should actually follow that. But there's also a codification. This is what they call a codification of the customary law. So in other words, trying to put together what has been practiced over time, so that then we don't have arguments like we're having now as to, how can we, do this and so forth. And then I think it was in 1992, I'll just verify the date. At that time it was the late paramount chief Riwako, and who at that time it was Chief Hoveka, who was the chairperson of the Chief Council. They actually wrote down, there's what they call some kind of procedures of what to do in terms of managing the Ovaherero community. And this is what they call Section 12, 11.1. So Section 11, subsection 11.1 deals with succession. It's about 2 paragraphs, actually, 2 lines that say, look, what should happen when the paramount chief is unable to proceed, whether it's through death or incapacitation, whatever the case might be. That then it talks about the senior chiefs, senior wolfman. In fact, it was written in Afrikaans as well, and the senior wolfman are those people in the chief council. And that is why we say, look, the most senior among the chiefs is the chairperson of the chief council. And that is the person, all those group of people then who are responsible for the transitional period. And the chairperson then continues to be the chairperson and therefore actually the acting paramount chief. It's written down. And these are documents also we submitted to court for, for consideration. Yeah. Of course, because it was written and it was written by lay people, obviously people can still argue, in terms of semantics and so on. But at least the intention of our chiefs at the time are written down. And they correlate very well with the practice that has been, carried over for more than a century now. Yeah.
Now, Doctor, you are a professional. You come from a corporate sector where compromises are the order of the day.
Yes, yeah.
You've also earlier shared with us that you are willing to sit around the table. So exactly how far are Chief Kapuuo and his supporters willing to compromise?
It's difficult to say at this stage because obviously it will all depend on the spirit. Everything is determined by how are we genuine? Are we negotiating in good faith? Are we really interested, both parties now, are we interested in finding a lasting solution for our people? I think when that is established, then people will be willing to wheel and deal, and say, okay, I'm prepared to take this and so forth. It's a bit premature now for to say exactly which terms of the agreement we shall go for now. I think we shall have to sit down and listen to what they are saying. And then from there, because obviously we might need 1 or 2 sessions. I don't think it will happen on the same day, Like, for instance, one of the aspects I mentioned, not that it will be cast in stone, is when I said, look, let's go back to the 18th of June, 2021. Now that the paramount chief is gone, let us imagine now this is the situation. How do we move forward? One would be to say, can we recognize, for instance, that the chairman of the chief council should be the acting paramount chief? For instance, as an example, if we agree on that, that's a step now. Next step will be to say, okay, look, fine. Can we now agree on the process now that we should follow in order to appoint the paramount chief. Like, for instance, the chief council should be calling in names, like what Chief Kapuuo has already started doing, by inviting the community to come up with names. If our colleagues agree to that, and then Professor Katjiua, for instance, becomes a candidate, in this process, then I think we are on our way. And then he competes against the other candidates. And if he emerges victorious, like I was saying in Dr. Anja, we will all support him because he will have gone through the process that we think is the legitimate process. And then we can close this chapter and we move on. Because as to who is really the paramount chief is not our main consideration, really. We don't really fuss so much about who is the paramount chief. It is about whether that person has gone through the process that is legitimate, so that whoever emerges victorious there, it'll be easy to deal with that person, and then also the community will accept him. And then, unfortunately, there's no hair at the stage, and then we move on with this person. Because there's so many things in this community that have to be resolved. Being the leader is only one aspect. It's maybe not even be the most important aspect. We have issues, socio-economic issues in our community. We have the big issue of genocide negotiations. So there's so many things, that we really want to focus on. But unfortunately, this is like a log in our eyes, until we resolve it, we cannot move as fast as we want to do. So we are willing to really come up with an open mind in good faith, like we've demonstrated even with those meetings that I told you about. We have always been open and explained what we think are the issues that are concerning us. And if by some, I wouldn't call it a miracle, but because it can be done, it can be done. If we can come to an agreement that yes, this is how we should do it, and everybody is happy with it, and I think it can be done.
Doctor, the OTA is, I believe, one of the biggest traditional homes. What do you think has this infighting? How has it impacted the image of the OTA?
No, look, wherever there is a dispute, wherever there is I wouldn't like to use words like squabbles and things like that, but wherever there's agreement, there's always strife, and people take up hard positions. Look, some people who take these things more seriously than others. For some people, it's a life and death issue, and they are prepared to go really to very extreme ends to have their position, shall I say, prevail. There are others who say, look, it's fine, it's a difference that we have, but it's not a death or life issue. We can really argue around that and move on. So you have these people among themselves, and unfortunately, the extreme positions sometimes they prevail, and so of course when other people outsiders, and that's maybe something that we need to hear from you as an outsider. It's very clear from our reading that obviously it has the image of not only the OTA but it's the Ovaherero people. That image has taken a big knock. Yes, because of the comments that I'm reading on Facebook and everywhere, it's just that, look, we just like arguing. We are Trotsemense, these proud people, big-headed, arrogant people, who don't want to resolve issues. We're just into fighting forever. So that is the image that is there, which unfortunately is not true, but that is the image we are portraying. And that is why for us it is very, very urgent that we resolve this matter amicably so that we can start to massage this image and hopefully restore the image of our people as very hardworking people, and so forth, so that we move forward with a real socio-economic development agenda that we think is very much needed, especially now more than ever before.
Now, in conclusion, Doctor, on Sunday, Chief Kapuuo and his supporters, mostly the council, walked past the tombstone, the now unveiled tombstone of the late paramount chief Vipuira. But as the customs of black society communities, people regard the grave of especially a leader sacred ground, and the way they walked past it looked like they showed it some form of contempt. Can you please comment on this?
Yeah. No, it's not really contempt. You see, I think we explained earlier, the original agreement was we will do this together. The unveiling of the tombstone is a symbolic process. And normally the leadership, the elders of the community are involved in this as well, together with the Omuyano, as I was saying earlier. Now, unfortunately, our colleagues came there earlier, and then they removed the covering. And so the elders, as you could see also the way he was talking there, he was very, very emotional, this Ondangere. And they were very, very angry that this thing was done in a manner that was improper, that was almost sacrilegious. Shouldn't have been done that way. So I think it was a manner of them saying, look, this thing was not done properly, so maybe they will have to perform other rituals or whatever to try and normalize the situation. So it's not because they had contempt for the chief, but I think there was just a problem with the way it was done. And our hope is that they will have to then come back together and say, look, how are we then going to normalize the situation, which is very, very abnormal on that day, and so that then we can again, venerate him in the manner that he should be. So the way they deal with the others, that at least they were in charge of that process of the previous paramount chiefs, and the whole process from burial to everything, but this one here, unfortunately, there was a lot of dispute about it and the way it was done. So that is why, that was my opinion. I've not yet spoken to them. That was just my opinion, my observation of, especially considering also the way the Ondangere or the traditional priest was communicating or communing with his ancestors. You could see that he was very, very angry. He said, listen, they've never seen anything like that before. So, and he was actually calling on, especially on Paramount Chief Riwako, to say, look, no, go and sort out this thing for us. This thing should not be done like this, There's some issues here in our community, and so please help us sort it. Go and talk to your colleagues now on the other side of life, and please bring peace and reconciliation in the community. So I think that was their message. And unfortunately, the way it was done was not proper, but I think there's now water under the bridge. I think we're moving on. There are new challenges now that we'd like to tackle. And we hope that this matter, sad as it was, that we can actually move on.
Thank you very much for joining us on the studio this evening, Doctor.
Yeah. You're always welcome, Jemima, and thanks very much to you and the Namibian Sun team and everybody, Namibia Media Holdings, really for very objective reporting. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. Have a good night.